John Scharf's blue spruce was planted in 1967. In its 53 years at Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, it has grown in the hearts and lives of visitors to the refuge. Scharf's blue spruce is located just east of the CCC-era Visitor Center and is home to myriad bird species from gold-crowned kinglets to nesting great horned owls throughout the year. This video is about trees at Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, Scharf's blue spruce, and about nature's plasticity told in 5 acts. Act 1. Partnering to do the most good while doing the least harm.
You yourself and Karen have been out here on the refuge since the beginning of October in order to begin the tree inventory and risk assessment process. And you're a few weeks into that, and how have the first couple weeks gone?
Yeah, it's been really exciting. We've been recording the locations of trees, where they are on the sites, their basic, estimating their age in relationship to their species, notating the species and the genus, and just creating a overall big picture map. We're entering now, after 2 weeks working on creating a map, now we're entering into a second phase. We're circling back to the same sites, revisiting trees that were tagged for further review. Trees that are in very close proximity to historic structures, trees that exhibited abnormal structures or symptoms or signs that raised a flag in the initial review. So we're coming back to these trees now, and instead of looking at 100 trees, now we are focused on 3 to 5 at a particular site, and focusing really carefully on what are the potentials for risk or conflict at this site. And one of the ways that we're conducting that is looking at the site, using our own experiences at the refuge as visitors, and communicating with our partner organizations and partner people to ask the question, what happens at this site? Do people congregate here? Do people congregate here for long periods of time? For short periods of time? Do vehicles park here? Is there an alternative to this use pattern that would be more, that we could implement as a cultural control? We have lowered the potential for conflict between the tree and the people. Is there a possibility to move cars to a different location, for example? And then when that's not a possibility, moving the people or the place or the thing, it's not a possibility. For example, in the case of a building, it's impossible to move. Then we ask the question: how can we interact with this tree and try to mitigate the potential for conflict between, for example, a limb and a building? And how can we interact with this tree in a way that preserves as much as possible of the tree and reduces as much as possible the risk? And this is not an easy situation to try to thread the needle, but so that's why we started with making the map. Now we're kind of coming back and spending more time with a specific candidate and trying to think very clearly and thoroughly about that. How can we do the most good while doing the least harm?
Act 2. John Scharf's blue spruce and a disturbance in the force.
What did you find when you returned to headquarters?
So on Wednesday or Thursday last week, we came to headquarters to begin creating a map of headquarters. And we began at the parking lot and moved eastward into the headquarters area. When we noticed that there's a blue spruce tree that's very well known to friends or visitors of the refuge, that's just east of the main visitor center in the lawn, and it was just a routine day. We were putting together our map, and we noticed that one of the stems, one of the tops of the tree, seemed to be further to the east than either of us had remembered from previous visits. And so we wondered, there's something going on here. This looks different than normal. I would say there was a disturbance in the force. And so we said, our plan is to make the map and then return to do further analysis. But this seems significantly out of norm. Let's change the plan and conduct some analysis right now. So we happen to have our binoculars along, because we're always trying to do some birding as we go. And we had the spotting scope in the truck, so we got that out and we set up, and we were able to observe that the stem there was a crack at the base of the stem where there's a codominant branch union, where two stems of equal size originate from the same point. And that point was at about a little less than half of the total height of the tree. And those two stems had, potentially in a windstorm or a high wind event, separated at their point of attachment, forcing one stem to lean to the east at approximately a 20-degree angle, and another stem to remain vertical but have significant damage at the point where it attaches to the parent stem. So we said, okay, this is a situation where exactly what we talked about in January is going to come together, because we have a tree that's iconic, very well known to anyone who's been to the refuge. It was planted by previous refuge manager, John Scharff, in the 70s. It was, for the last several years, has a great horned owl nest prominently visible in the middle canopy. It's right in the center when every visitor comes, even someone who's just coming for the day, or a hunter, or a person just coming to look at historical things. They will definitely see this tree. And the stems are splitting and causing a potential hazard in a busy birding season when people are congregated in the lawn looking at birds. And another stem is leaning towards the historic visitor center, which has historical significance itself, and also is the functioning the place where all the functions of the refuge take place, and the manager's office is in the potential fall path. So there's a lot of potential for problems here, and when there's a potential, whenever there's a high potential for problems, that also means there's a high potential for solutions, and when things get really bad, they can also get really good.
Act 3. The options. Finding the middle path.
Yeah, so when we encounter this tree that's what we would call actively failing, we outlined several different options. The first option, as always, is do nothing. Do nothing, let nature do whatever nature will do. With the proximity to the buildings and the potential for large gatherings or congregating of people in the spring, that option seemed unreasonable. We have restrictive tape, but it's hard to imagine that could be a really practical solution in high birding season. So that was option one, do nothing. And we said, that's an interesting option, let's set it aside. Second option is, well, let's go to the other extreme. The other extreme option is remove the tree. Whenever all trees pose some risk, always. There's no way around that. Trees are living things on a living earth, and they're unpredictable. And try as we may, we human beings can never control or understand all of the potential interactions and forces at work in the ways that living things may respond unpredictably. So therefore, on the other extreme from do nothing, the other extreme is eliminate all possible risk associated with this tree by remove the tree, grind the stump, lay new sod, and nobody can even trip over the stump now. There is zero risk associated with this at all. Given the historical significance of the tree, its residence in the birding community, etc., this was also an unacceptable option and unpractical. So we said, this is the worst case scenario. We don't really want to go there. Let's just put that on the other side of the table. And so in between, we have options for reduction of the failed stems and preservation of as much of the tree as possible. And this is the middle path, the middle way of saying, yes, these stems have failed and nothing can put them back together. They have, the wood is cracked, we have seen that, we have been able to document that. The wind is blowing, the stems are moving, nothing can bring them back together. And the path that we are attempting to pursue is reducing those parts of the tree that are failing so that the total amount of mass and weight is reduced, and attempting to put supplemental support in the form of steel cabling inside the canopy to support the remaining stems that are now going to be exposed to new and different wind loading events than they were in the past, because the geometry and the architecture of the tree is changing radically. So this is the middle path. It's what we talked about in our meeting in January. This is an example of this, trying to mitigate hazards that could be impactful from a safety perspective, and preserving and maintaining and potentially even enhancing the value of the tree in its context of migratory birds and nesting birds and so on. And one of the principles that's like, there's two big principles that are underlying this. One principle is the idea that the value of trees extends beyond the tree's own life, or its own life in our human perspective. In our minds, we think, as humans, we think, well, this tree has begun to fall apart. It's at the end of its life. It has no more value because it's not a beautiful tree anymore. It may have less value to us as people. It's not. The legend is John Scharff planted it for a Christmas tree. It's not as easy to put Christmas lights on it now that parts of it fell apart. So it has less value from the human perspective. But to the rest of the world, to the animals and the insects and the birds, it continues to have value, and its value may actually change or increase in a positive way. And so that's one principle, trying to get our minds around that the tree itself, besides just the basic ethical beginning that a living thing has value, but that its value may be different than what we perceive. The issue is not with the tree. The issue is with the interaction between the tree, the place, the people, the birds, the animals, and trying to zoom out or back up, slow down, and look at the big picture, and understand that it's more than just this one living thing. It's this one living thing in this one living place with these other living actors and co-conspirators. And
Act 4. Collaborating with Scharf's Blue Spruce.
trees are here because people were here. And so for the trees to be here, we need people, and we need to interact. We need to observe without judgment, and we need to interact with the living things. And our role as human beings is not doesn't necessarily need to be restricted only to abusive relationships and doing things wrong. We can interact in more productive and collaborative and productive ways if we think about it and try.
October 19th, 2020. In an effort to collaborate with Scharf's blue spruce, a 5/8 inch cable was installed around the 5 codominant stems, including the failing stem. This cable's purpose was to provide support for the failing stem and to reduce the risk to the CCC-era visitor center, while giving refuge staff and partners time to make a plan. Act 5. Trees go on with their lives. The tree makes the decision. November 17th, 2020, 3 p.m. Sustained winds of 36 miles per hour, wind gusts of up to 51 miles per hour, and the wind was blowing from the southwest. During this wind event, Scharf's blue spruce broke nearly halfway up the trunk. Thanks to the 5/8 inch cable and the wind direction, the CCC-era visitor center was spared.
Already an owl.
Many thanks to arborist John Brown and Karen Toulouse, Janelle Wicks from Friends of Malheur, Teresa Wicks from Portland Audubon, Isabel Florade for use of her photos, Malheur National Wildlife Refuge staff for your partnership. If you have a favorite memory of Scharf's blue spruce, please consider sharing in the comments below. Thank you. Stay tuned for information about John Scharf's blue spruce and the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge tree plan.